I think we're
Great.
ready to. I think we're ready to start. So, yeah, just dropping in. We have been embroiled in a lot of technical difficulty, but yeah, we're able to. We bypassed it somehow, and so yeah. This is kind of different from what I normally do on my channel, which I don't know if I've set a precedent for my channel because it's pretty much just whatever I like to post, I presume. But yeah, today we're doing something a bit different, and we're going to be talking with the very talented Julia Minamata, who is she's an artist and a video game developer who has recently come out with her great retro adventure mystery indie game, The Crimson Diamond, to some very impressive acclaim, especially for it being your first game, and in which you produce everything but the soundtrack. And but you've also done a lot of illustrations for the New Yorker and Maclean's, and I enjoy those a lot as well. So today we're just going to be talking a little bit about the Crimson Diamond and what it means to be a creative person in today's world, which it can be a pretty scary prospect with things like AI and various hurdles, I guess, if you want to call them that. But yeah, I'm delighted to have you, and I'm delighted to be able to talk to you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I guess my first question is, how are you doing? I know we just got off from a lot of technical mishappenings, but
Yeah, I mean, it comes with the territory for sure. I mean, I stream as well, and I know all about the mic's not working or we can't hear each other. Or that's happened so much on just on many things that I've been on, so I'm totally used to it. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's been a bit more than 2 weeks since I launched the Crimson Diamond, and yeah, it's been going as well as I can expect it. I think I'm really pleased with how it's going. People seem to really enjoy the game, and yeah, it's been going well. I'm kind of now ready for like a bit of a break. I think I just pushed a big update the other day, just some quality of life fixes and some bug fixes and things like that. But I think there's still plenty to fix. Like, there's typos and there's a few things otherwise. But I'm gonna like let it be for a little bit because I do need to decompress. It's been kind of like in a pretty intense past, well, the game launched on August the 15th. So even leading up to that, a few weeks leading up to that, and then during the launch, and now we're like post launch, it's been a lot. And I just feel like I do need to take a little bit of time away. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to now.
yeah, I was going to ask you, has it been sort of a whirlwind? Because from what I've seen, your game it's got very overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam, and it's also been covered in video game publications like Polygon and quite a few street. I saw Limmy playing it the other day,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I know we I know we talked about that a little bit over Twitch,
Mhm.
but it was actually a really surreal experience for me because I think I was aware of Lemmy through his, like, he did the sketch comedy show for
Mhm.
BBC. And then I found out that he did Twitch streams as well. So I go to his channel, apropos of nothing, and I see him playing something that looks a lot like the Crimson Diamond, just because of the art style and the fonts. And then I realized that, oh, he actually is playing the Crimson Diamond. So it was a very
Yeah.
surreal kind of experience.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to watch him do that live because I think I was away that day. But I'm trying to like catch up on the VOD and everything. But yeah, it's that kind of thing where, yeah, you see, and seeing the game covered in like Polygon and Kotaku and Rock Paper Shotgun and all these places, it does feel kind of strange. It does feel strange to see that kind of thing happen, for me too, especially. Yeah, it's been super positive. Yeah, during launch, a lot of streamers were playing it. I feel really fortunate that I stream as well. I stream on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, and I've been streaming like game development stuff like that. And then also my musician Dan will stream like composing the music live on stream. That's something else we've been doing for the past 4 years. And I've gotten to kind of know people like online with like the retro Twitch community because my game does look retro. It's not really retro, but it does look very much retro. And I enjoy those retro games. So I've been watching a lot of streamers play those. And I've been fortunate enough that a lot of the people that I've been watching and have been kind of enjoying their streams have been playing the Crimson Diamond, and there have been times like around launch where I will be like trying to watch three different streams at once. Like one is in my earbud, one on my phone, one on the iPad, one on the computer.
Yeah.
But it's because I don't want to miss it. But then yeah, I mean, it's been super cool to get to watch people like you say, like I've enjoyed watching people streams and getting to see them enjoy the game. It's surreal.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up, but I think the way that I found your work was through Neil Cicierega, actually, because
Yeah.
I remember the time, I remember when his last, I guess it's his last album, major album release, he did that mashup album, Mouth Dreams.
Yes.
And I remember that Neil, probably, this was when Twitter was not taken over by Elon Musk and you can kind of see what people liked. And I got a notification that, yeah, I got a notification that Neil liked, I think you made some fan art in the style of that album cover.
Well, here's the thing: is that I have my the Crimson Diamond logo has like the red and the blue type, and it's got a very the font looks. It's not even really a font; it's just kind of like a hand done type. And
Yeah.
I've had that logo for like almost like more than 6 years at this point. So when I saw Neil's album cover, I'm like, that looks like my logo. It wasn't. I didn't make my logo look like his album cover. Like my
Yeah.
logo came out first, and then I saw it. I'm like, that looks. I'm sure it's a coincidence, but it just looks
Mhm.
so much like it. It was so funny because it was even the same colors and the same type of font, kind of
Mhm.
font styling. It was just one of those things where it was super cool. And like, yeah, I mean, Twitter, it was really cool to just get to connect with people like that, just randomly.
Yeah, I
It's funny
think
that you
that
saw that. That's really funny.
yeah, and then when I actually was like, "Oh, what's the Crimson Diamond?" I was pretty intrigued, and then I looked into it and I realized, "Oh, this is extremely up my alley. This kind of gener this is something I'll touch on later, but this kind of this creative spirit that kind of inhabits just this unalloyed, love for this unabashed kind of creativity and joy that kind of harkens back to, the early internet. And I saw
Mm.
that in your game and I thought it was just really well done. And then I started, getting more invested in it. But I think that's how I initially came across your stuff.
Well, that's really cool. What I really like is that I know my game has a retro look, and for the most part, like my main audience is people who remember playing these types of games in like the late '80s, early '90s. And I'm just going to go ahead and guess that you're probably not one of the people who played these games in the late '80s and early '90s.
I was not alive.
Which see which is what's really fascinating and exciting to me because sure, like my main audience is people who have this nostalgia, but I also want to appeal to people who don't have that nostalgia and the people who like you who are seeing it just with fresh eyes and just enjoying it on its own terms that way. And for me that makes me feel really good to know that I am at least catching the attention of a few people like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really play many video games, not for any particular reason, but I think that text parsers in the vein of what you're doing, they catch my eye because it is it's hard to put into words, but it's a more kind of tactile experience, and it's less about stimulus and more about immersion and story.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's why it appealed to me so much when I, started checking out your stuff, and when I eventually played the demo, and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, I think for me it's the same thing. When I played text browser games, I felt much more immersed in the games that have it because it kind of does force you to pay close attention to what is being said and what is being described for you in the game. And because there's no dialogue trees, so you can't just like go down your laundry list of subjects you can hit and ask characters. Like you never know what you can ask characters. And then when you find
Mhm.
out and you learn through the game what you can ask people, it becomes like a really organic way of actually conversing with the characters in a game, and that's something I really do like. As well, that feeling of just engaging with the game actions in a different way than people normally do with point and click adventure games, where you're kind of like you're cycling through actions and you're like clicking on things and everything. And I do like those too. And in a way, those are good if you want to appeal maybe more broadly to people who might want to play the game on like an iPad or play the game on console and things like that. I knew going into this that a text parser was kind of a hard sell, partly because it's not really great cross-platform. I don't really see it being something easily playable on something like like a PlayStation or an Xbox or something. But and also for another reason, it being like a text parser is not something you see very much nowadays. Although I do find it, yeah, totally one of my favorite ways to interact with the game, which is kind of why I went with text parser myself.
Hmm. Yeah, it was really cool to have that connect. So I guess Neil is kind of like he's just a very interesting guy, and I've talked to him a couple times, but he's very elusive. So
Oh,
it's hard.
cool,
It's hard.
cool.
It's hard to get a hold of him. He's a very talented guy, though, and I've been watching his stuff for listening to his
Mm.
stuff for a while. But I was gonna enough about Neil. This is not the Neil. This is not the Neil podcast. I'm sorry, but I was gonna ask you, did the Crimson Diamond, as somebody who is also an artist of different trades and things like that, often what'll happen with a creative idea, with me in particular, what it'll start off in one medium, and then I'll realize that it sort of translates better to another vessel of story, or just another platform entirely. So I was wondering, was the Crimson Diamond, did kind of the primordial form of it,
Mm.
was it a story in another medium and then it kind of permutated into a game over time, or was it always set to be a text parser?
Well, the very early start of the game was, it was just art. It was just a bunch of pixel art rooms and everything. But yeah, I mean, from there on to kind of working on it as a game, I never thought about it as being something that could be in another medium. There are a couple times people have said to me, "Oh, this would be kind of cool to have it as like a novella or a short story or something." And
Mhm.
I've always tried to turn that over in my head about what that would look like, or how I would write that. And it doesn't, for me, it doesn't really seem to translate so well. Um, I feel like the actual design of the story as it is in the game is kind of inseparable from it being a game. Although I do think it'd still be a really cool intellectual exercise to try to convert it to something else. That could be a lot of fun. But yeah, I think from the ground up, it was basically, I conceived it as a game designed that way.
So there were, kind of, were there character sketches? Did you write a Bible for the game, or was that all kind of organic and happened over a certain period of time?
Um, I had like a actual game manual that I had made about like 6 years ago. I had started a manual where I had some profiles of like the characters and everything, but like nothing with spoilers, just like their introductory, like what they were like and their ages and stuff. But I kind of do wish I had been more organized in terms of like what the characters were like and what they do through the course of the game. I think that writers probably have like really well organized systems on how to track all that stuff, and I didn't do that. And part of the reason I didn't is because I actually have never taken any kind of creative writing courses or anything where they might teach you like systems about how to stay organized and the way to chart characters as they go through a story. And I didn't really have that. And I find that sometimes the writing can be a little bit confused in some aspects because I've taken a lot of time to make this game. So the bulk of the development happened in the last 6 years or so, but I was playing with it for like way longer before then. I was teaching myself how to use Adventure Game Studio, teaching myself how to make the artwork. And there's stuff that I made early on that I don't even remember writing now, which is not a great thing because when something takes that long, you can kind of lose track of it if you don't have a well organized system. And I
Yeah.
feel like next time, and I always say like, oh, next time it's going to be so much better organized in every aspect, not even just with the writing and the characters, but even with the coding. Like this is my first time making any kind of game, programming anything myself. And there's so many ways it could have been organized much better. And that kind of just motivates me to want to do the next game.
Yeah, I think that also I had a couple questions about writing that came a little. I guess it's relevant to bring them up now, but I think that writing for text parsers in general, I think it's a bit of a different. I mean, I've never made a text parser, but I would imagine it would be a bit of a different challenge to write the dialogue, because if you, I guess if you look at, like, the very mainstream kind of accessible, like, I don't know, maybe Grand Theft Auto or something, the dialogue is sort of, very, it's more off the cuff and it's more
Mm.
conversational. I think that with text parsers, I'd imagine it needs to be more systematic and more pointed toward the
Yeah.
actual story. So I was wondering, was that kind of a difficulty, having to kind of, I don't know how to word it exactly, but that kind of not conversational, that kind of systematic instructional writing,
Mhm.
was that difficult to get across, not having written for a game before?
I was very mindful about that aspect of it because as a text parser, you kind of need to tell people the words they need to use. Like you need to kind of help people to find out what nouns they can look at or what verbs they can use. That's definitely something I kept at the top of my mind when writing the room descriptions. When you're writing the dialogue for characters, you don't want to go on and on with them because you want the player to be clued in to like certain keywords that they might be able to then ask about, and you don't want those
Hmm.
to get lost in like mountains of dialogue. So I did try to keep the dialogue pretty short. I wanted to keep the written descriptions kind of to the point. And I think part of what helped me to kind of remind myself to do that is when I do stream on my Tuesdays, I usually end off my stream with like playing a retro game. And sometimes they're text parser, sometimes they're not text parser. But sometimes, yeah, I'll be playing a game and then they'll require me to do something, and then I'll be like, oh, that wasn't in the text description for this room, and so how am I supposed to know that's there? And that type of thing was really helpful in reminding me. I was not perfect either. There are times when I could have done better, and I am still updating the game to include like more text parses and better descriptions here and there to help people with that. So I was definitely not perfect in that aspect, but I did keep it very much in mind because that's a text parser, and you can't just rely on the player to know what you're talking about. Like you have to be specific and you have to be succinct because otherwise it's going to make it even more difficult for them to play
Hmm. Yeah, that was exactly the word I was going to use, succinct, because
it.
I think that for people who are kind of not acclimated to these kind of games, I think when they're playing it for the first time, not your game in general, but games of this kind of ilk, like Colonel's
Mhm.
Bequest and things like that, I think that because it's so not really based on stimulus, a lot of people infer that it's boring, but really it's, I guess it's more analogous to like a choose your own adventure novel where
Mhm.
you're finding the story as you go, and it can be incredibly rewarding when you get in the thick of the story.
Mhm.
So I kind of wish that people gave these kinds of games more of a fair shake instead of writing them off, because I think that there's some really cool engaging stuff there.
Yeah, I really tried to make the game approachable for people who had never played a text parser adventure before. And one of the ways was I do have a tutorial room that kind of shows you the basics about how to use a text parser. Um, and also, it's also a matter of yeah, trying to keep the writing pretty simple, but also having a notebook that tracks your progress and kind of keeps notes of like stuff that you found out during the course of the game and things like that. And there's also a text parser command called review, which you can type in, and then it will kind of tell you like what you should be doing next. I tried to in those ways make the game something that you would not be stuck potentially, and even so far as to actually put like a link to a hint book that opens up in your browser if you get stuck. I really
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that players would be able to play through the game and enjoy it and not get super frustrated with it, because I do realize that a text parser is a bit of a high, it's a big ask for people nowadays, and I tried my best in a bunch of those different ways to kind of alleviate that.
Yeah, well, I think we can all agree that you did a really great job, because it has caught the attention of people who I don't think they're very familiar with. I mean, myself included.
Mhm.
I haven't played one before. I found your game, and then I started
Mm.
branching off to playing Colonel's Bequest. I love the music from Colonel's Bequest.
Yes.
I'll just be listening to the Stray soundtrack like on the bus,
Oh,
completely
that's
removed.
fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely removed of any context. But yeah. So I was gonna ask, so you primarily did, you still do illustrations, right?
Not so much anymore, just because the game dev stuff has kind of expanded to fill all that time that I would have. But I did do the key art for my own game, so that was kind of my most recent illustration, which was kind of felt like a nice full circle moment because that's kind of the stuff I would do when I was more of an illustrator. Yeah, right now it's been mostly like I said, like updates and bug fixes for the game, and then me kind of thinking about what's going to come next, which hopefully it'll be like a sequel. I also, in between those, I want to have like a bit of a palette cleanser and make like a smaller game, maybe with a different kind of graphical style.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, the thing is when I went to school for illustration, and I still use the stuff I learned in illustration in my program like just about every day. I mean, we learned like graphic design, and so I know how to like make my own promotional materials, and they taught us how to make our own website, so I made my own website. even like business practices. Like I know like I can skim through a legal contract and like just make sure that it's kind of like not a horrible terms and things, like the basics of that. Like I'm not a lawyer or anything, but just to know the basics of those kinds of legal terms about copyright and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
yeah, just having that like that background in art was very helpful, because as an indie game dev, art is like a big deal. Like that's a way you can really distinguish yourself from a lot of the other games out there just at a glance. That was super valuable.
Yeah, so that kind of brings me to asking, how was the transition to primarily doing these illustrations, which you have some really lovely illustrations. I'll put them up on the screen when I
Sure,
edit
thank you.
when I edit this. But they're often they're kind of decidedly not pixel art, with
Hmm.
many vibrant flat kind of
Hmm.
colors. So I was gonna ask, how was the transition to doing that kind of illustration to doing something which is more pixel art laden?
Hmm.
Because I would imagine that um, just in terms of like things like dithering and shading, it's kind of like an entirely new terrain.
It's pretty different, but there in certain aspects it was quite similar to what I was doing before. I've always been kind of attracted to two-dimensional art, and it first started with like with comic books and like Japanese woodblock prints and those types of things. So it was kind of always been more two-dimensional, and also fairly limited color palette as well. Most of my illustrations, even when I started doing digital illustrations, most of them are no more than like 8 to 10 colors. Really, I was
Hmm.
already kind of doing that. I was already restricting the colors. And when I was doing silkscreen printing from illustration, I'd restrict it even more. Like I might have maybe make 6 to 8 different colors in something. And I would use tonal dots, which is like a way you can like try to get like a third or fourth color using like, small dots on the silkscreen and things like that. So in some ways it was kind of like a similar approach. Although yes, I mean like pixel art is kind of it was a bit of an adjustment, but not so far from what I was kind of doing already, I feel like. And of course, I had the benefit of having a bunch of different like screenshots on the internet I could find, like Sierra games and LucasArts games that I could learn just by looking at what they had done. So
Hmm.
it was actually surprisingly not too difficult of a transition for me to go from one to the other.
I would imagine that learning adventure game. I've made some stuff in Adventure Game
Mm.
Studio, and that quality of it being interactive and the characters being ambulatory kind of
Mhm.
gives it kind of, that was a strange word. I don't know why I thought of that, but it is the correct word.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I think that kind of lends itself to a different type of work. And I'm very novice when it comes to Adventure Game Studio. I really don't even know how to do like sprites, but I can do the very, basic kind of cycling motions.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
was wondering, so how were you led to illustration in college? Did you always, kind of have the classic childhood story of, just loving to get lost in drawings and things like that?
Yeah, I think I even still have some drawings when I was from when I was 6 years old, somewhere like buried in a closet. But yeah, I've always loved drawing. And then kind of like in middle school, like which is like grade 7, grade 8, I had a teacher, Mr. Watkins, who had a friend, Ken Lashley, and Ken Lashley was the artist for Excalibur, from Marvel Comics Excalibur. And so
Oh,
he came in
that's
and did a
cool.
talk with us. Yeah, it was really really cool. And I got him to sign a comic book of mine and stuff, that he had done the cover for. And it kind of just occurred to me, oh, like people like actually make a living making artwork and they get paid and stuff. That's kind of amazing. And it kind of, for me, it kind of like shifted my perspective what I might want to do in high school and then in college. So for high school, I did not go to my home school, which is like the one that's local in my area. I ended up going to a special arts high school because I thought, hey, I can do my regular courses, and then I can also do like this enriched art program, which is really cool. And I was really interested in doing that. Got to do like a lot of really cool art stuff. I got to do life drawing in high school, which is actually kind of rare, I think, because you don't usually tend to get that until college, which did help me get into my college, which was my arts college. Um, and I kind of was kind of sitting on the fence about. I knew high school. Okay, I can get all my science and math courses in high school, and then I also did the special arts. And I thought, okay, well, am I going to go? I was thinking about going into like computer science, which I did get into. And then that would have been a university course. But then I applied to get into this arts college, and the most competitive arts college probably in the province at the time. I think it probably still is now. And I just kind of applied to see if I could get in just out of curiosity. I was thinking that I would go into computer science in university. But then when I got into the arts college, I'm like, hey, what, like, why not? Like, why don't I actually give that a try and see what I think about it? And that was like I mean, when you're that age, you think it's like the biggest life decision you'll ever make. And it was for me. And I did make that decision. I went to my 3-year arts college program. And yeah, it was the best decision that I could have made. And I'm super glad I did do that, because the programming came later, which if I had to pick which one to pick up later, I would definitely pick up the programming later. The art thing, it takes a lot of like time and dedication to get good at art. It's not just a matter of like figuring out how to do something right. It's about like training your eye and training your hands to like actually be able to do this stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
really grateful that I had all that time in college to dedicate myself to acquiring those skills. So that was really really good. And from finishing that, that's when I went into editorial illustration, which is like magazine and newspaper illustration. Like you got to pick like a stream. There was book illustration, there was advertising, and there was editorial illustration. And I picked editorial illustration because it was the one where magazines and newspapers would. I mean, at the time they would constantly need more illustration, and in that way you could maybe pick up a bunch of little jobs here and there, and hopefully you can make a living for yourself. When I was graduating from college, um, already like digital media was kind of a thing, and like print media was kind of in decline. It was kind of really hard to get work in magazine and newspaper illustration, and I had a lot of free time. And then that's when I discovered the pixel art, and that's when I discovered Adventure Game Studio, and watching people do let's plays of like Adventure Game Studio games like the Ben Jordan series and Yahtzee Kurosawa's Chuzo Mythos series, and learning about, hey, there's this engine that people are using to make adventure games, and that looks like something I could do. I mean, only one person made that game, so why can't I just do the same thing? And that's kind of how I got started with it.
Yeah. That's a good point. I think that I think that the advent of the internet has emboldened a lot of people to just completely, go buck wild with their creativity and
Yeah.
not, and I think that's a really wonderful thing because it just it I think the internet is a fairly poisonous place in some aspects. I would argue that that kind of enrichment and
Hmm.
communion and empathy is probably the lifeblood of the internet and probably one of the best things the internet has to offer. So
Yes.
it's really cool to see how you just went for it, and I think it turned out really great.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I agree with you. I think I couldn't have done it without the internet and all these things, because I learned how to use Adventure Game Studio from YouTube tutorials. When I needed help, there were Adventure Game Studio forums, and now there's an Adventure Game Studio Discord. I can ask people questions, and I've connected with other Adventure Game Studio developers, and when asking them questions about not even just the technical aspects of using the engine, but also how do you put a game on Steam, and what are the best practices for doing that from people who had done all that stuff before. I couldn't have done any of that stuff without the internet. And not to mention, of course, we don't even need to get into stuff like digital distribution. Like, I don't need to get boxes printed in warehousing and logistics and shipping and all these things. I can put my work on Steam or on Itch.io, and people can just buy it and download it. And it's this wonderful, accessible thing that anyone can now make a game, which I think on the whole is really good, because we're talking about self-expression and being able to put out our unique ideas and our unique stories and our unique perspectives. It does make it hard to kind of get attention for your own game, because it's so much easier than it was. But I love the fact that it's easier now, and thanks to the internet, we can get access to all these people, not only like learning how to make games, but making games, putting them out, and then getting some responses, connecting with like-minded people. It's like the best thing.
Yeah. So were you always, like, as a child, were you kind of enmeshed in this world of computer games and text parsers and things like that?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. My dad was kind of an early adopter of computers. We'd always, like, ever since I was about maybe 5.5 or 6 years old, we had computers in the house. He'd always bring them home to work on. His actual job, he would be able to like bring a portable computer, which is what they called it at the time, which was like this compact that was like 30 pounds. It was like the size of a suitcase and had like a screen like this big. But along with that, it came with like software. Like he would just swap software with his office mates, and they would like photocopy the manuals and do all that horrible like pirating stuff that would happen. But as your kid, you don't know anything about that. You just see like, oh, more games. I get to play games, and my exposure to it was really early. And I also learned about like word processors. Like me and my sister were some of the first kids probably in our grade that were able to do like word processing of like our homework and stuff. We actually had access to those things, which meant I tended to be pretty comfortable fairly early on with computers and be exposed to stuff like like King's Quest and text parser games. I was very 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 fortunate to have those things. And then when I went to college, then I started to pick up stuff like Photoshop, to learn how to use Photoshop and everything. And it was a really good start, I think, with having that comfort level with computers and with the experience of playing those games back in the day, for sure.
Yeah, you kind of got acclimated to what they
Mhm.
were trying to do.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of had the same experience where I grew up in I pretty much grew up in a house flush with computers and flush
Mhm.
with books, and I think
Mhm.
that kind of environment. I don't even think it's not like my parents were playing me classical music in the womb,
Right,
where
right, yeah,
they wanted me to
yeah,
become some sort of polymathic genius.
yeah, yeah.
I think that even though that environment was incidental, if you put a child whose brain is growing and
Mhm.
continuing to absorb information, they're kind of inevitably gonna come out interested in creative pursuits and education and all these very fruitful kind of wonderful things that people try to kind of get you to lose sight of as you get
Mhm.
older, that kind of sense of childhood whimsy and that open-minded curiosity. So I had kind of the same experience as you did.
Yeah, I had a lot of books growing up. I was a huge reader, and I think that definitely did help when I was writing my own story. Even though, like, this was literally like my first creative writing exercise was this game. I've read a lot when I was a kid. I feel like I need to get back to reading more nowadays because I've kind of fallen off of it a bit. But yeah, I did have a really good start with both of those aspects, just like you. I mean, I had like my mom was a big reader, and like we'd go to the library and stuff, and read tons and tons of books. And from my dad, I got like the computer stuff and being an early adopter with that.
Mhm. And speaking of books, I detected quite a bit of. I was gonna ask. I'm actually pretty excited to ask you about this, but there was like some playing the game. I noticed some kind of strands, like these extraneous influences beyond the realm of video games, and I noticed a lot of like Boxcar Children and Nancy Drew and Hardy
For
Boys,
sure.
like those
Oh yeah.
those like very cheap paper thin kind of paperback novels, and I enjoyed reading those as a kid as well.
Yeah.
But was that kind of an influence on the kind of mysterious, nebulous tone of the whole game?
Yeah, I mean, to mention, in terms of like my mom, and she was the one who was the big book reader in the house. I mean, she loved mystery. She loves mystery books, mystery stories, mystery TV shows. Yeah, I read a lot of Hardy Boys. I read a lot of Nancy Drew. Watched a lot of Columbo. We've been watching Father Brown. Yeah, just steeped in like that type of mystery, that genre of that type of mystery, that type of writing. And I do think, yeah, definitely it's like right, like subconsciously, it's like deep in my bones to like have that kind of stuff. So even with like the same thing with the old adventure games, there are certain things in those where it's not really technically callbacks, but just like that influence is so deep ingrained within me that I do feel
Mhm.
like both sides of that family, my mom's side and my dad's side, have really like have informed what how the game plays and how the game like reads. I do
Mhm.
consider the game more book like you mentioned choose your own adventure. Like I do think the game is more book like than like a movie or a TV show. Like it's very I like to say it's very patient. Like the player sets the tone and they set the pace of the game, which is
Mhm.
something I really appreciated in this type of game. You don't have to worry about like running out of time, or you don't have to worry about accidentally progressing through the game. Like it's always extremely deliberate in terms of when you choose to do that yourself.
Yeah, I noticed those influences, and I think even removed from the influences on your game, I think in general, probably a lot. I think the developers probably looked to a lot of those early kind of
Mhm.
Hardy Boys esque kind
Mhm.
of mystery, kind of kind of cheap whodunits
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
an inspiration, because even a lot of the visual motifs in a lot of those games, like the magnifying glasses and the
Hmm.
overall color scheme. I mean, it's a very different style. If you look at the cover of those books, a lot of them are these really uh, waxily drawn, like like painted portraits, which I always thought were pretty cool, actually. But yeah, I think that you can kind of tell that they were probably picking up on that as some inspiration.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. For my own key art, I was looking at like the Nancy Drew book covers for my key art as well. My mom has like a shelf full of like vintage 1970s like Agatha Christie paperbacks, and I'd always look at the
Oh
covers of
yeah.
those, and think how surreal they looked and how like amazingly wonderful they were. I've
Hmm.
only read a few Agatha Christie actually, but I really should get back and like read all of the ones that she has because there's quite a collection.
Yeah, I think I saw you were showcasing some Agatha Christie
Mhm.
books that you had,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, gorgeous vintage Tom Adams covers. There's just something about them. Yeah, it's so evocative and so compelling. I used to get scared from like some of them were like very scary for me as a kid. And I always I love to like pull them off the shelf and look at them and scare myself and put them back.
Yeah, as we're talking about this, I kind of got reminded of well, I'll get to the next question, but I did want to bring this up. I got reminded of as a kid, I had a few vinyl records where they were children's oriented, and
Mhm.
inside of the gatefold there would be a book
Oh,
that you would read as you're listening to the record.
oh, that's cool.
Yeah, like I think there's one for there's like a Sesame Street there's a monster at the end of this book where it's a person who's narrating the book, and
Mhm.
inside of the vinyl is the actual book. So I
Oh,
feel
that's
like,
great.
yeah, if I was, so it's that kind of childhood nostalgia. I feel like if I was making an adventure game, that kind of aesthetic would be very conscious, like this just entirely homespun childlike
Mhm.
thing, which I think is that kind of spirit is just a catalyst to a lot of this online creative work that I think that you're a part of.
Yeah, I love hearing from people, that say that you've brought me back to that time when they
Hmm.
felt that had that those formed those memories or had those feelings. Yeah, that kind of is one of my favorite things to hear when people say, like in the reviews or on videos like Pushing Up Roses. She recently did a video of the game, and she said at the beginning, I think she said that when she played it, it took her right back to when she was sitting at the computer with her best friend and they were playing it, and her parents were watching TV on the couch in the other room, and
Yeah.
that feeling, that's I wanted to recreate that feeling, not just for other people but for myself. And
Hmm.
that's a for me. I'm like, okay, I feel really proud of myself that we got to get there with that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that as a person, as a young person who makes things, I think it's very valuable to have kind of these kind of cultural lighthouses or these tenets of inspiration. And for me, that was cartoonists like Takeuchi, who did the Sailor Moon, and
Right. Yeah.
I'm not even necessarily into anime that much. I just admired
Mhm.
the artistry and the world building of it. So people like that and Bill Watterson of Calvin and
Mhm.
Hobbes. Did
Mhm.
you have any kind of similar creative idols that you looked toward at either as kind of encouragement or kind of enlightenment? I don't know.
Yeah, oh, totally. There was this series of books called Usborne Solve It Yourself, and they eventually became called Usborne Puzzle Adventures, and they were this really beautiful, like brightly colored. Oh, they almost were like mystery. They were almost like adventure games as book form, where you'd have a spread and like you'd have to solve a puzzle or look at a map and like try to find where you are on the map, or do like decode something and things like that.
Hmm.
And I remember getting them like when I was maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years old, and just loving them, just being things like, oh my gosh, this is like playing a little game, but it's a book, and the art's beautiful and the layouts are beautiful. And there was like a series of 25. And we had me and my sister together had maybe about six of them or something, and they had different artists on some of them. But the ones that we had, four of the six, I think, were done by Graham Round, who is a British illustrator, and I love them to death. They were super colorful. You can maybe even see, like, if you were to look at those. There was Escape from Castle Blood. There was Curse of the Lost Idol, Murder on the Midnight Plain, and Danger at Demon's Cove. Those are absolute favorites. Super super influential books. And I was actually super fortunate last fall when I went to something called Adventure X in London. I got to meet Graham Round, which is something I never
Wow.
thought I'd ever get to do. So this is kind of illustrator hero of mine. I brought him the books, and he signed them for me. He gave me another couple of books as well that I didn't have. That type of thing, absolutely. Those are hugely influential. And it's funny because I've tweeted about the Usborne Puzzle Adventure books, or the Usborne Solve It Yourself books, as they were called. And other people who love adventure games too, who said, "Oh, I remember those books. I love those books so much." It feels like, yeah, there's a lot of common ground, I think, for adventure game fans in that way, where even if you didn't like necessarily grow up with those books, just if you know about their existence, you look them up, you're like, yeah, that's exactly, we
Mhm.
all kind of seem to be coming from the same place with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, it's good to have that kind of those commonalities. So
Yeah.
when you first started, when you were kind of like during the development of the Crimson Diamond, were you? I guess I'm just wondering. Before, when you were playing these games as a child and really
Mhm.
enjoying them, did you ever venture out onto the web, of these communities of? In the early '90s, I was actually just looking at a lot of these old forums are still online of these adventure game fans just fawning over these games, and fawning over their creative process, and fawning over the creators, and trying to send them emails. Were you ever exposed to that world, or did your fandom not really go there yet?
It didn't occur to me to go there. It's just kind of
Mm.
funny because I do know that those fandoms and those forums have been around for a really long time, and I guess it literally just never occurred to me. I feel like I just enjoyed those things in isolation, almost. Like I had friends who played them as well, but I never went online looking for other people who enjoyed the same stuff. I have no idea why. I guess I was kind of like a very like insular type of a kid or something. But yeah, I think that type of thing. I know people who were parts of those fandoms, and then also like you made friends online back in those days, which is something I also didn't do at the time. But I'm doing kind of that more nowadays.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's just this feeling of that shared interest, which I think is really good, and that also that community, this incredible sense of community. Adventure
Yeah.
Game Studio has an incredible community, and that's part of the reason I think it's persisted through all these years, is because you have the same people that are like helping out, updating the engine, maintaining it. They still do a get together every year, which I've never been to, which is something else that I want to do. But yeah, it's funny that it just never occurred to me to try that. But yeah, like I said, I'm kind of trying to make up for lost time now.
Yeah, I mean, the internet was it was extremely rudimentary. It was pretty much all just text and,
Hmm.
maybe 4 pixel, you know, illustrations and things like
Hmm.
that. But it's good that you have that kind of community now. And
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you about the music,
Hmm.
because as a big part of me getting into the text parsers, as well as a person who composes music myself,
Hmm.
um, I noticed that the scores to these games are incredible, with so little. I think that
Yes.
it sort of it's kind of analogous to the visual ethos of it, where
Hmm.
it's using a
Hmm.
very confined, um, smattering of colors. And I
Hmm.
think that the music in those games, it's pretty much all MIDI. It's probably about 3 to 4 tracks at a time, but
Yeah.
these very evocative, beautifully chirping kind of melodies that really kind of spoke to me. And I know that Dan Polisar did the
Hmm.
music for your game.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
was wondering, I think he was very faithful to that kind of chip tuney
Hmm.
Baroque style of
Hmm.
arrangement. And I was wondering, so with your level of involvement in it, did you kind of suggest arrangement or instrumental choices, or did you just kind of oversee the mixing and the mastering process, or to what degree were you involved with soundtracking the game?
It was pretty collaborative overall. But yeah, when you mentioned that authenticity of the limited visuals and the limited music, like not like limited in terms of like skill level, but just the limited amount of resources that you can use.
Yeah.
Um, Dan Polakar was incredible, and he volunteered to use the synth from back in those days, like the Roland MT32 synth, which is
Mm.
why the sound sounds so genuine. It's because he was using the same synth that those composers were using in the Sierra games to compose the music. So he was actually using the exact hardware with the exact limitations to produce the music, which I would never ask anyone to do, but he took it upon himself. That was incredible. I love the fact that it looks it looks like authentic. It sounds authentic. That's one of my absolute favorite things about it. and it was very collaborative beyond that. Like I said, we composed most of the music like live on Twitch, and there's about 40 plus minutes of music in the game.
Mhm.
And I would say stuff like, "Oh yeah, I want this to sound like a Canadian folk tuney. It needs to sound like it from the early like kind of 1900s." I would like I like direct him on like certain things like, oh, "Okay, maybe we can go faster here, or slower here. Let's try a different instrument." So it was pretty collaborative overall. But I trusted Dan very much to come up with what he came up with. I knew that it's not really my thing, and he's an expert on that type of a thing. And yeah, I trusted him a lot with it, and I'm so glad I did because he just knocked it out of the park. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I was looking up his stuff, and he's worked with some pretty high profile
Yes.
people,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think in that field he is. Well, I don't want to tell tales out of school because I don't know Dan, but I think he did a great job with the music. But um, it is an entirely different playing field genre wise than that kind of. I don't know. He I guess a lot of the artists he's worked with are kind of like mainstream pop artists, and I think, yeah, I think that there's really there just text parser music and mainstream pop
Mhm.
music pretty much have nothing compositionally in common besides maybe being in 4/4 time, but even that's a gamble.
He,
So
he did some waltzes for the game, so even
yeah.
still. But yeah, yeah, so what's cool about Dan is, yeah, Dan is, he's been in Sean Paul's band for like 13 years by now, I think, and like they tour all over the world together.
Mhm.
But what's also great about Dan is, yeah, Dan is just like I've said on the Pushing Up Roses video, it's like he's a giant nerd where he loves this stuff. He grew up with the same games I grew up with. He
Mhm.
collects the big boxes and everything. So he's also very much steeped in that music from that time. Like he's incredibly familiar. It's like it's intrinsic to him his self that
Yeah.
that music, which is exactly what I is perfect for me and is perfect for the Crimson Diamond. Super fortunate that Dan was able to work on my game. He's also incredibly versatile too. I mean, he is. I would consider it now an expert on using the Roland MT32, but he's also composed like more traditionally for like Romero games. He did music for Empire of Sin. He composed the trailer music for Roberta Williams' Colossal Cave Adventure, the remake of that one. And he's currently working with Laurie and Corey Cole, who made the Quest for Glory series. He's working on their new
Mm.
project, which is kind of incredible too. So yeah, Dan is just incredibly multi-talented. Also, because of due to his Sean Paul connections, he was nominated for a Grammy on the album Frequency. So he's kind of all over the place. Like I'm so that's one of those examples of being connected with someone over the internet and just like this really lucky, fortunate thing. And it couldn't have happened anywhere else.
Is that how you made the connect with him through the internet?
Oh yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, just about everyone that I've collaborated with. I've worked on other games. Like I worked on something called Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator. I worked on Witch Strandings and something called Recommendation Dog for the Playdate. And all of those projects have been 100% collaboration via the internet. Most of
Mhm.
those people I've never met in real life, except or maybe even briefly. Like I met Xavier Nelson Jr. A couple times at a couple different events for like 5 minutes at a time. But like the bulk of everything that I've done and collaborated with other people has been completely online.
Yeah, you're swapping files instead of swapping spit. Um, I think that's a good way. I mean, I think that kind of that file sharing is. I wouldn't say. I don't think there's anything. It's incredibly convenient, and I don't think anything is lost than walking to your friend's house with a floppy disk with a piece of music in hand and being like, right over this. But I do think that to make things that are meaningful, you need to have a certain set of drawbacks or a certain set of limitations because you can be working with the most high kind of profile equipment and make something that is utterly devoid of soul and just not quality work. So I was going to ask you, this is my last question. So the EGA color palette that's used in these types of games that you utilize in this game, it's a restriction, but it's kind of imperative to the creativity that's nestled inside of it in the world that the story is predicated upon.
Yeah.
And I kind of think of, like some of my favorite musicians, like They Might Be Giants. Like
Mhm.
early on, they were, using these really chintzy keyboards and this 4-track equipment, this 4-track console where you have 4 tracks and you have 4 input and output jacks, and that's pretty much it. Maybe you would record on top of the cassette that you just recorded on, but that was, but even then the audio would probably be horribly degraded, but I digress. But those kinds of limitations, I think, are so sort of imperative to that sense of creativity, and it really, I think, to make something meaningful and magical, you can really do a lot with so little. So I was going to ask you, did you feel like that helped the game as sort of a kind of a guidepost that you kind of did the art on, or was it more of a drawback?
Oh no, it totally helped me. I'm the same way. Like I love those restrictions. I love
Hmm.
those limitations. And working within those limitations, you feel like, yeah, it's an extra bit of success when you can make that all work within those limitations.
Yeah.
When I started doing the pixel art, it's kind of like, well, where do you even get started? Like, what colors should I use? How many colors should I use? What resolution should I be working in? When I looked at the Sierra stuff, that you already kind of have those restrictions where you're like, okay, they're using 320 by 200 pixel resolution for their screen, so that's how big the pixels are going to be relative to each other. So that's already a good thing for me to start with. I had a really good starting point. I loved EGA color, the color palettes from those older Sierra games, and I knew, okay, well, that's exactly, why don't I just go with that? I'm going to go with exactly like their pixel art dimensions. I'm going to go exactly with that color palette. And so those kind of things are like, it was like half, not going to say half the work was done for me, but like half the decisions felt like they were made for me already, in which case I'm free to just work within that. Yeah, I
The
absolutely.
parameters were already defined.
Yes, exactly. The parameters are already defined. I'm super appreciative of that. It's kind of funny because those other projects that I mentioned, I was even more limited with those than I was for the Crimson Diamond. Like Space
Oh,
Warlord organ trading simulators, like I did the organ trader portraits and like the organ inventory items, like the pixel art, and those are like black and white basically. And the organs must offer like 25 by 25 pixels, and the trader portraits are like 50 by 50 pixels, so like smaller than Crimson Diamond, like way fewer colors. Same goes for Witch Trainings. That was again black and white. Same goes for Recommendation Dog, where the whole screen was like I think it was 240 by 120 or something like that. I can't remember the exact, but I mean, it was pretty like low resolution. And that again was black and white. And I don't see myself going above 16 colors ever. I actually really love working black and white, or even like other limited palettes. Yeah, absolutely. It's for me, if I have too many decisions to make, I kind of freeze. Like I have no idea what to do with that. But just give me like a strict set of rules. And I think it partly comes down to my experience as an illustrator for the magazines and the newspapers. It's because you had a very certain, like this is what you need. It has to be like eight
mhm.
by six. You have to have an eighth of an inch bleed. It's going to go on the left side of the page, and here's what the headline's going to be, and here's, you need to come up with some visual concepts for the article that we're going to send you, and it's going to be on newsprint, so you have to make sure that the colors are going to pop, and you're not going to have lines that are too fine because the ink was going to bleed on newsprint. It tends to bleed pretty badly on newsprint. All these things like that, I love to be able to fulfill that kind of creative brief in a way that is successful. And I think that same attitude about it is how I approached making the game. I wanted to have a pretty clear sense of what the format was going to be. Like adventure games, there's a pretty clear format about what's going to be involved with it and the kind of mechanics you're going to have. So that all that stuff, even beyond like the EGA color palette, even beyond the resolution I was working in, the genre itself comes with these limitations and restrictions and expectations. And I loved working within that and trying to make,
Mhm.
my own kind of put my own mark on those things, put my own spin on those things. That part was very exciting for me.
Yeah, I think that that was probably those kind of choices. I think that there is a thing in creativity as too much autonomy, where definitely not in real life. You can't get enough autonomy in real life. But when you're working on a creative project, I feel
Mhm.
like if you have too many options, then it's sort of crippling in a way, because it seems paradoxical. But I think that some of the best work I've done has that I felt was on very inferior equipment and
Mhm.
things that probably um, would kind of be scoffed at by kind of professionals in that field. But I think that that kind of DIY, do it yourself ethos really added a lot to the creative projects that I was working on.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
yeah, I'm glad to hear that you had that same kind of realization about the not just the color palette, but the resolution and the just pretty much everything.
Hmm.
These parameters are already kind of set in stone, and then you just
Yes.
have to kind of build on top of them
Hmm. Hmm.
instead of building from scratch, which would be a very daunting prospect, I
Yes.
imagine.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. Well, my last question, I was just going to ask you. So you said that you're going to take a little break
Hmm.
from kind of being involved with the Crimson Diamond, and you're just going to take a bit of a breather.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering what is next for you creatively. I think that you've said you wanted to work on a sequel to Crimson Diamond in the future,
Yes.
but is there anything else that you're looking forward to or currently working on that you want to promote?
Yeah, well, there is an adventure game documentary that's happening called Legend of Adventure, and they backed. I think they exceeded like 400% of their goal on backer kit, and I'm going to be working with them. I'm going to be working on some graphics for that, which I'm very excited about.
Oh,
So
awesome.
That's going to start this fall. So that's probably going to keep me a little bit busy. Um, and yeah, I do want to kind of make my own small game in between like the two big ones, a
Mhm.
little small game, partly because I want to start with like a cleaner template for building a larger game on. I mentioned I learned a lot of things about like organizing and like coding and design and everything from the Crimson Diamond that I would like to incorporate into something, into the sequel that I eventually do want to make. But I want to make like a small game, kind of like a proof of concept, just to make sure like I have everything kind of like organized well, and then from there I'm going to take that and then build the sequel on that. But I do want to start with like something much smaller, just as a bit of a palette cleanser between the two projects. But yeah, I do have like a bunch of notes about what I want to do with the next game in terms of like mechanics that I didn't get to really do in the Crimson Diamond that I would love to try that I've enjoyed in other games, and different kinds of writing and trying to kind of put more twists in it, maybe make some subtler characters. And I've got a lot of like research I want to do, but I've got like a ton of ideas, and I'm very excited. But I do want to give myself a little bit of a time to just decompress from this because I still feel like like I said, I just pushed like a pretty large update like yesterday, in fact, and
Mhm.
and it doesn't feel like it's over yet for me. I haven't really gotten a chance to relax since even before launch, a couple of weeks before launch, 2 or 3 weeks before launch. It's been like a kind of like a high pressure time for me, and I feel like I need to just relax from that, and then I need to then reapproach what I want to do like later on.
Mhm.
But I'm excited by the prospect because people have been super positive about the Crimson Diamond, and I've got so many ideas, new ideas that I want to do.
Yeah, I hope that this interview is a respite from that high pressure, kind of high octane environment that you might be feeling. Because I think that it's very easy to become overwhelmed when you're
Hmm.
doing, especially when you're making a creative work, and you feel like that you kind of decided upon this nebulous time crunch
Hmm. Hmm.
that you defined yourself, and it
Yes.
just puts so much stress and anguish on you, basically.
Yes. Oh yeah. We mentioned about this idea of having all these decisions to make and how the restrictions are great because it reduces the number of decisions you have to make. Well, yeah. I mean, I self-funded and I self-published this. I had to, every day there seems to be dozens and dozens and dozens of decisions to make, and it is exhausting to do that. Um, it's every aspect of it is just a series of different decisions you need to make, and I do look forward to kind of not having to have that on myself so much for a
Mhm.
little bit, I think. But yes, doing stuff like this, like talking to people like you and having these really good conversations are really nice. It's a really pleasant way to pass the time because it kind of gets me to um, kind of try to think about things in a different way, like or articulate things that
Mhm.
I'm feeling like I actually need to say in a a very like a succinct and straightforward manner, like express verbally maybe all these different things I'm feeling inside. It kind of makes me have to do that, and I think that's actually really helpful.
Yeah, well, you could have pled the fifth at the beginning of the interview and just did it all in mime, and I think we would all be equally as happy. But yeah, I hope that I think that you made a really great game, and you're someone that I really admire because of your talent and your verve and your individuality and creativity. And it's, as a person who makes things myself in a lot of different fields, kind of being bred out of this same kind of, nerd persuasion. I don't like the word nerd, but if I had to, characterize myself, I think that would be well within the ether of words that I could use. I think as a person working in those kinds of fields, I think that you're making really great stuff, and
Thank
it
you.
was just delightful to talk to you, and I think that you made a really great game, and I can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you so much, Matthew. This was a wonderful conversation. I very much enjoyed this. So thank you.
Yep. So check out the Crimson Diamond, and if you want to plug any of your social media, you can do that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely check out the Crimson Diamond. You can buy it on Steam, on Itch.io, on Fireflower Games as well. We're still working on getting it on GOG, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, please, if you like the game, please leave a review on Steam. It really helps. Like I mentioned, visibility is always an issue with indie game developers, so that would definitely go a long way to making the game more visible to other people on Steam. If you go to thecrimsondiamond.com, you can find all the links like social media and stuff. Like I'm on Twitter and Mastodon and Blue Sky. I do stream on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on _Maple Mystery. I do Crimson Tuesdays there, and even though the game is finished, I'm still like I'm working on an EGA demake of the key art that I made for the game, and I also
think I was there for when you were doing that.
So yeah. So that's still something I want to finish up, and maybe if it looks good enough, maybe I'll make that the new key art. I don't know, but I also like to do retro. I stream also retro adventure games on Twitch as well at the end of that evening. Put the VODs up on my YouTube, but yeah, you can find all that stuff at thecrimsondiamond.com.
Well, I'll put. I actually I designed. You can't see it right now, but I designed a little dialogue box that says it has your at, and I tried to follow the stylistic. I didn't know what font you use for the Crimson Diamond, so
I designed it myself. That's why you don't know.
Yeah, I well, there you go.
There you go.
I got something that looked kind of similar though.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
But anyway, I guess you'll see it when I upload this interview, which is now coming to a close. But I will put all that stuff on the screen, and yeah, go check out Julia's stuff. She's very talented, and I had a lovely time talking to her today. So thank you, Julia, and I hope that everything is well with you, and hope that you take a lot of care.
Thank you. You too.
See ya.
See ya.